She did actually appear to be a perfectly normal girl, with the same aspirations as most of her friends. She wanted to get married, she wanted to have children, have a family. She was quite tough. I mean, those who played netball with her at school said she was definitely a toughie. She wasn't one who would give in easily. She was a leader. She accumulated girls around her. But she seemed in every possible way to be absolutely just the product of her time and place. He was actually a very good-looking chap in his early days. He also drove around on a motorbike, and he was rather different from everybody she'd ever met before. She actually said he was the first man she'd known who had clean fingernails, coming from a kind of solidly blue-collar background where everybody had manual jobs. That was perhaps true. She was attracted to his elusiveness. He would sit in the office reading strange books, and I mean really strange. He would read Mein Kampf and things like that. He was a pseudo-intellectual, and she was quite attracted to that. He was different, he was interesting, and even more important, he took very little notice of her. And like many young girls, she fell in love with a man who was being distant and unavailable, and of course that makes the passion a lot stronger. She became more and more desperate to attract his attention. She wrote this rather schoolgirlish diary at the time about, he looked at me today and Ian was in a bad mood today. Rather silly little things, but she was very determined she was going to get her man, and he was the man she wanted. Quite how she herself got sucked in is very interesting. By degrees, I think, is the answer. He inculcated her into the almost cult of killing that he'd established. And he tried later on to do the same with David Smith. He gave her things to read. He gave her the Marquis de Sade to read. He talked to her about sadomasochism. He took her to see very strange films. They actually went to see a film of the Nuremberg rallies. He thought that anything to do with the Nazis was wonderful. She was still totally enamoured. He was this amazing, interesting, different person, not at all like the boy she knew who, wanted to be Elvis Presley and a quick kiss behind the dance hall afterwards. He was something else entirely. So Myra was still enjoying this feeling of being different and being special, and he worked on that, and that is how, by degrees, she came to believe that anything that Ian wanted her to do was right and worth doing. And she became his, interestingly, he called her Hessie. This was partly because of Myra Hess, the pianist, her name Myra, but more appropriately, Rudolf Hess was Hitler's lieutenant, and she was his lieutenant, and he saw her as the person who would help him fulfill this dream of committing murder. She flew in the face of all our preconceptions about women. Women are nurturing, women are kind, women like children. Men, on the other hand, can be cruel, can be tough, can be whatever. She flew in the face of all that. She also, at her trial, maintained that very hard, resolute front. She didn't portray herself as soft at all. In fact, I've always maintained that if Myra Hindley had played her trial differently, she would probably have been out after about 7 years. She could have played the part of his acolyte and very much under his thumb, and she could have played a very soft and remorseful role at that trial. But she didn't. She was stony-faced, she was tough, she was hard. There was the famous police photograph of her with the blonde hair, staring straight to the camera, looking tough, looking hard. And that's how she became remembered and known. And she became a figure for universal hatred. Much more than Ian Brady, interestingly, who is just perceived as perhaps, a rather sad, mad, evil man. Dorothy Wing was the governor of Holloway, and she, like so many people in Myra's life, was seduced by Myra in the sense that she came to believe that Myra was an interesting, intelligent and better person than her crimes would suggest, and she wanted to improve her life. And this happened to the extent that she actually took her out for a walk on Hampstead Heath with her dog. I think it was perfectly innocent on Dorothy Wing's part, but it was a really foolish and foolhardy thing to do with such a celebrity prisoner. Pat Cairns was a prison officer. She was a lesbian. She was actually living with another prison officer at the time. she came to work on the wing where Myra was, and she ruffled the feathers of all the girls, and Myra fancied her and fell in love with her straight away. And this became an ongoing love affair. Notes were smuggled between the two. They had secret meetings in the chapel. They had secret little snogging sessions here and there. And eventually a plot was hatched that they would actually spring Myra Hindley from prison. It sounds bizarre, but it was quite an advanced plot. Casts were made of keys, plans were made, everything was afoot, and then one of the women who was involved in as a go-between actually shot them. Had they never met, I don't believe Myra Hindley would ever have committed murder. I don't think there was any interest in it or impetus towards it in her. She was a very tough person and quite capable of violence, and quite capable eventually of accepting violence, which I think a lot of people would not be capable of. So there was some inherent ability to cope with it, with the violence and the killing in her, but she had no feeling or need to be involved in that, and he did. I think, as a society, we needed to see her as a very abnormal, vicious, hard woman. She clearly wasn't that. She really wasn't. She was an intelligent, interesting, somewhat manipulative, somewhat tough, but nonetheless no tougher than, any woman who's running an office anywhere in this country. We needed to see her as different because there is a fear in all of us that perhaps we are capable of great evil given the situation.
Even after